Hi folks, welcome to my video and I'm Samik. Today I'm going to show you how to connect Nextjs with MCP client. Right now there is no particular videos which I find on YouTube which talks about how to connect Nextjs with MCP client, not the way Model Context Protocol documentation says. People are using Vercel MCP adapter, which is good, but that was designed for server-side events, not for streamable HTTP. What is streamable HTTP and what is SCC, we will understand in the video. But right now, let's understand how to connect Next.js SaaS with MCP client. So before understanding what is Next.js SaaS, how to connect with MCP client, we need to understand some basic terminologies. And that is MCP host, MCP clients, and MCP servers. So what are MCP hosts? Right now, if you are using Cursor or Cloud Desktop or Windsurf or VS Code which supports MCP or something, a platform which supports MCP, right? So that particular thing is MCP host. And what is MCP clients? So those LLMs which are doing MCP protocol negotiation, that particular item will be called as MCP client. So MCP clients are managed by MCP host. So MCP host actually has the MCP client, and MCP client communicates to MCP server through a protocol, and that is done by MCP client. And what are MCP servers then? So right now, as you know, LLM has a lot of knowledge, but it doesn't have a proper context or proper knowledge about what we are talking about, what data source we are talking about, or what prompt we are talking about, and what are the functions we want it to use. It doesn't have any context, and providing that context to MCP client, that through a protocol, that is done by MCP server. And that's why you can see MCP servers give context to LLM through resources. Resources are nothing but your PDF, your image. We don't send the whole PDF or image, we send the URL and it downloads it in its own server, and it sees what context it needs. And after that, it can access tools. Tools are nothing but it's a fancy word for functions which you define in your code. And again, prompts, you can also send prompts to MCP servers. I know this is fantastic. Now we have understood what is basic terminologies about the key differentiation. Now let's come to what are the ways to connect MCP servers or MCP clients together through Nextjs. So there is one simple approach and there is one complex approach. Let's talk about the complex approach first. You can use any of the SDK which MCP supports. Let me show you one way. So right now you can see here in the SDK, you can see C Sharp, Java, Kotlin, Python, Ruby, Rust, Swift, TypeScript SDK. Like there are total of 8 SDKs if I'm not wrong, right? So and the ecosystem is growing. So what you can do, you can use any of the SDK in whichever language you are comfortable, you can do that. But there is one problem, and that is you have to host that MCP code into one server. So right now, if you are selling a SaaS service, or if you are selling something which end consumer doesn't understand a bit, right? So they have to go through and fro, and you want to centralize something, then this complex method is not suitable for your application, right? So for example, if your application is built with TypeScript and it is hosted, like it is built with framework like Nextjs or something with Svelte or something like Remix, something similar to that, right? Or maybe it is built purely on React. What you need to do, you cannot host you cannot use the React or the existing infrastructure if you host it to a different server, right? So you have to authenticate the different server. So this will be a independent server, right? And you don't want to do it. You already have this setup and you want to integrate right into your application so that you don't have to manage everything from this start. And that's why the simple approach is creating a different API route right into your code base, and through that you can give access to your own functions which is present in your code repository. If you have hosted in independent server, you have to authenticate every MCP server request. So there will be two layer of authentication, that is from MCP client and that is through MCP server. But if you just install it just write the code into your own code repository. You don't have to do authentication to verify the MCP server. You know this MCP server code is valid. You just need to authenticate the MCP client. So this is how these two things are different. You can always choose as per your easiness. For example, if your code base is written on Golang, for example, and there is no proper SDK for Go, there is community built SDKs, but no proper official SDK for Model Context Protocol from Model Context Protocol team, right? So at that time, you can host a different server through a Python SDK or TypeScript SDK in Node server, or any independent SDK for your server, which is provided by the official documentation of Model Context Protocol. So this was all about the simple and complex method. Now let's come to our how. How exactly do they talk? So right now, if you are writing some code, if I'm talking with you in English, right? So this is a language. So consider MCP client and MCP server talk with a language called JSON-RPC2. Why not JSON-RPC only? So if you go to the official documentation of Model Context Protocol, and maybe I show you this JSON-RPC. So right now, if there is a line why we are not using JSON-RPC and instead we are using JSON-RPC2, so you can see unlike base JSON-RPC, ID can be null in JSON-RPC, but in JSON-RPC2, ID cannot be null. So this ID is very important because whenever MCP client sends a request to MCP server, it sends an ID and MCP servers return back with the same ID so that MCP client knows for which request it is sending the response. And that's why it is very, very important to send ID. And that's why JSON RPC2 is used. And you can say that it is how client and server talk using this protocol. For more information, I have linked this URL, as well as I will link this Excel draw PDF or something resource. You can integrate right into your browser. So you will get the link in the description below. And if you're watching on Twitter, comment MCP architecture and I will DM it to you. After then, we have to understand the then. Okay, I have understood how we are doing and then what? Then choose your transport method. Right now, what is transport method? For example, I am talking to you in English, but how we are communicating, like how what is the transport? If you're watching this in YouTube, YouTube is one of the transport. If you're watching this in Twitter, Twitter is one of the transport, right? So the platform from which we are communicating with each other, and that is your transport. Now there are different type of transport which MCP supports. That is STDIO or maybe file based. File based and STDIO is similar. I'm not sure about the similarities, but STDIO is one of the transport, and the second transport method is streamable HTTP. And streamable HTTP has again two types of transport method, that is server sent events and one is post request. The current method which is suggested by the MCP team, and that is streamable HTTP and post request, not SEC, because in SEC you have to manage state. It is not stateless like post request. It is stateful, and you have to manage all these sessions, and for that it becomes complicated. And whatever Vercel adapter provides you, it was built for this particular use case because you have to manage everything, and that's why that adapter was helpful. But now with streamable HTTPS with supports post request, you can easily do this. So you have understood post, and these are the options which I have created. Like you can use post request or you can use SSC, but again post request is like recommended by the MCP team, and SEC is deprecated right now as of time. And you can see the transport method. So you can see this is the protocol revision, and you will see that streamable HTTP is the way how to communicate with remote MCP servers, and client should support STDIO whenever possible. So why STDIO is given? STDIO is there only for local storage, like whatever stays in your local computer, for that STDIO. So basically MCP clients are generally hosted in MCP host, and MCP host has one server, and that's why they say STDIO should be there with MCP client, but it is not compulsory with MCP servers. So you can read with what STDIO is, but this is what MCP streamable HTTP is, and you can optionally create SEC servers also, because things are moving fast, but some have already used SEC, so you have to make your client as well as your server responsible for both of the events. And that's why you can see, you can read the official documentation. I've linked down this particular page. You can go and read about transports, and let's understand this diagram, which is very beneficial if you understand it properly. So you can see how client and server communicates. First of all, client sends a post initialized request, and then server sends an initialized request with this MCP session ID. Then again, client sends a notification, that is initialized notification, and then a server says accepted, just status. It is like I have accepted it. There's difference between request, response, and notification. Whenever we send request, we send response, but whenever we send notification, we don't need to send response, and that is just one way like one way communication. But request response is two-way communication, and that's why you can see for request there was response, but for notification there was no response, there was just a status that it is accepted. Now whenever client requests something, it sends a HTTP like post request HTTP, and then server sends a response while their connection remains open, and then again server sends like the message from after processing what is the final message. So this is how things work, and that's why the session ID is important. That's why ID cannot be null, and that's why we are using JSON-RPC 2.0. And this is what options are and how to use Streamable HTTP. Again, go refer to this. Now we have talked about theory, what, why, how, then. Now let's talk about the hands-on with Nextjs. So this is the guide. This is what you can give to your prompt or your AI. And there is one more important information, and that is what you need, and this server maybe, yes. So this is one of my server which I have created. So let me show you the real code. So this is the route I am talking about. So for example, if I'm in API, you can see I've created one MCP route, and this MCP route has all the code, like all the tool definition, all the initialized request, what to do when and how to do when, and we will see how this works. So you can see I have created one post as well as get request. Get request is important. Right now MCP inspector or cursor, I just tested in two of them, and they required get request to actually get the request. Like they send request and they receive some list of tools and everything like that, and that's why we need to design the get request also. And this is only important for SEC stream. This just establishes SEC stream, and you can see the post request is our main user, like main point we should discuss. And let's talk about what it is. After you have created a route, which we talked about, you can create a route. You have to define course configuration. Right now we have course configuration in our application. So you can see this is the course. You have to allow all origin, because client is again can be anywhere. Right now whenever you are using your own server or your own client like browser, you knew that from what client we are getting request, from what IP address, for what, from what domain. But client can be anywhere, so we have to allow all origin. And what are the like methods we need to allow? We need to allow these three methods. Then for headers, what are the headers we are allowing? And that is authorization and accept, and then we have MCP session ID. And after that, access control expose headers. Okay, and these are the course configuration you need to do. Again, I will link this down with this like Excel draw. You will get the GitHub repo as well, so you can refer this and give this context to your AI. So you don't need to understand the whole code. You just understand how this actually works behind the scenes. After that, as I said, you need to design the get and post request. So we have designed the get request and what we actually need to give. And now let's come to the post request. This is the real implementation of our MCP server. So before using MCP server, what you need to do, you need to create functions like whatever tools you need. For that, you need to create this synonym function. For example, maybe if you are building a calculator, so that calculator must have addition function, subtraction function, multiplication function, or power function, something like that. And for that addition, we need two parameters, or it can be many parameters. For division, we need only 2 parameters at one moment of time, and that's why we need to define parameters, and then we will define that function parameters to our tool definition that I will show you. So you can see that, for example, this is my maybe function mark task complete, and you can see what I am doing. I am getting all the ID, like for the arguments I am getting user ID. For the arguments which I am getting from the post request which I have designed, like the function for the post request. And you can see I've designed the tool call for, maybe let's go to the mark as complete for like tool call, which I have given in the function as well, like I have explained to you guys. So you can see this is the tool, this is the description, mark a task as completed. What is the input schema, the parameter properties I need, and that is nano ID, the type, and I have also given the description what it actually is, and completed. Like these two are the parameters which I need for my mark task as complete function. So right now I have given arguments as any for faster development, but I can always make it type safe. So this is what we are and for what we required, and that is nano ID. So you can see how we have mapped our function with our tool call. Tool call like tool list to be precise. And whenever we are getting request, first of all we need to authenticate. So you can see before processing any of the request, you need to authenticate request. So again in this code you will get how to authenticate request. So right now we are giving each user API keys, and that API keys they can hook up into any of the MCP client. And what is the format? So if you go to the readme.md, you will get the format. Okay, this is the format. So maybe this is the MCP server, maybe config file, and in the config file they can give this particular item. So they can give the URL with the API endpoint, and for the headers authorization and then bearer token. This MCP token will be different for every user, which they can get from the dashboard. And for that I have also created route. So if you have not watched my previous video, you will get the whole walkthrough and how to use this repository, and you will understand how this MCP server works. And once you have done that, you have authenticated the request. Now we will pass the JSON request, and we will see exactly how to, if the case, like if it is initialized request, what we send as a response. If it is a tool list, like listing all the tools, what response do we send, like tools, what tools we have in hand. And again, if the case is tools call, so again we will see what tool call we are making. Like for example, mark task is complete was called, and you can see we are calling that function. So again I'm giving tool args as the function, like arguments, and then the user ID, so that for each user ID it refers through that data only. And if there is any error, we throw that error, and again it will pass as a response. And you can see this response was sent. If it is error, we send the error, because sending error is also important when MCP client and MCP server are talking. So that it knows that that request failed, I need to again evaluate my request, and I need to send a new request. And you can see in the documentation also they mention that sending error is very very important. And right now you can see what result and what ID I am sending. So, and by default what exactly I am sending if none of the methods are matched, and the final error which I am sending if I'm not sure about what error it was. So you can see I have defined different errors, and this is how it works. So after getting request, send response with status in JSON-RPC2, which I have explained right now. And this is the whole architecture you actually need to build MCP server. So refer this code and refer this diagram, like the Excel draw here, and you are good to go. And you can integrate MCP server right today only with your API keys for each customer. And if you have any questions or if you have any comments, please let me know through comments. And I will see you in the next video, guys. Bye.